They didn't know who they just embarrassed. The Miami sunset painted gold across the water, and the yacht gleamed like a floating palace. Music drifted through the air. The clink of champagne glasses echoed, and guests in white linen and designer dresses moved in choreographed grace. This was the kind of event where faces were familiar, last names were legendary, and net worth was whispered like gospel. It was the annual Horizon Bay Charity Gala. Invite only, high stakes, and high fashion. Malik Carter stepped onto the dock alone. No flashy watch, no loud announcement. His calm presence barely rippled the surface of the glamorous chaos around him. He wore a crisp, white linen shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, clean navy chinos, and a pair of boat shoes. No Rolex, no logo-heavy belt. Just him, tall, poised, and quietly confident. He didn't walk like a man who needed to prove himself. He walked like a man who already knew who he was. But that was the problem. To most of the guests, Malik was invisible. To a few others, he was a curiosity. And to the yacht hostess, he was a threat to the evening's image. Madison Wells, the events coordinator, spotted him the moment he approached the gangway. Her eyes narrowed as she mentally scanned her mental guest list. White, middle-aged tech bros in pastel suits. Expected. Blonde influencers in 6-inch heels. Check. But a black man, alone, underdressed by their standards, and confident enough to stride aboard without a smile or small talk. She didn't like it. "Excuse me, sir," she called out sharply, blocking his path with one heel forward step. She smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. "This is a private event." Malik stopped, unfazed. "I'm aware." She folded her arms. "Do you have an invitation?" He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out his phone. With 2 taps, he showed her the RSVP email, his name clearly printed, along with the donor tier, Platinum Benefactor. Madison didn't even look. Her eyes stayed on his face, searching for something that would give her permission to say what she was already thinking. "This event is for registered donors only," she said. Malik tilted his head slightly, still holding the phone out. "I am one." There was a tension in the air, invisible but heavy. A few nearby guests turned their heads toward the interaction, sensing the drama unfolding. A young couple in white stopped mid-sip. 2 older men leaned on the railing and whispered to each other. A camera crew setting up for the evening speeches paused, unsure whether to keep filming or look away. Madison's tone tightened. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You're clearly not on the list." "You haven't checked," Malik said calmly. "Sir," she cut in, ignoring the phone now. "We have very limited capacity. The last thing we want is for anyone to feel uncomfortable." The irony hung in the air like humidity. "I understand," Malik replied, "but I'm exactly where I was invited to be." She waved over 2 security guards standing by the yacht's bar. They approached with a practiced mixture of apology and enforcement. "Please escort this gentleman off the dock," Madison said. "He's not registered." Malik remained still. "You really don't want to do this," he said softly. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't arrogance. It was a simple, tired truth. The kind that comes from living 1,000 small humiliations and knowing how they all tend to end for the other person. Madison raised her chin. "And you don't want to cause a scene." At that moment, the security guards flinched. One of them seemed to recognize Malik, his eyes going wide before he quickly masked it. But orders were orders. They moved closer, one gently gesturing toward the dock behind him. Malik looked down at the water, the rippling reflection of the lights, then back at the people behind Madison. People who had stared but said nothing. Some looked away now. Some were still watching, unsure if they were witnessing a justified removal or a mistake that would cost someone dearly. He stepped back onto the dock slowly, putting his phone back in his pocket. There was no anger on his face. No shame either. Just weariness. The kind you carried after spending your life, proving that you belonged in rooms where others were simply assumed to. As he walked away, the chatter resumed, but quieter. less joyful, less drunk on luxury. Some guests whispered. One woman with a clipboard checked her tablet and froze when she saw his name on the list. Too late. Malik walked a few paces down the dock and leaned against a polished metal railing. He took out his phone and dialed a single number. It rang once. Then a voice answered. Malik. He spoke clearly, but low. Yeah, I just got kicked off the boat. A pause. You're joking. I wish I was. You're outside? Right now. It wasn't the first time Malik Carter had been judged before anyone bothered to ask who he was. He stood by the dock railing, calm on the outside but simmering within. The yacht behind him sparkled with lights, laughter, and clinking glasses, moving on without him, as if nothing had happened. But Malik knew better. These kinds of moments left cracks in the surface, and eventually, something always leaked through. He could feel the stares still sneaking glances his way. No one approached. No one apologized. Some guests who had seen the confrontation now acted as if they hadn't. They went back to their cocktails, their chatter, their carefully curated conversations about business, politics, and luxury investments. Anything to avoid facing what had just happened on their floating shrine to status. But Malik didn't need their apologies. Not yet. That would come. He adjusted his sleeves, took a breath, and stared out into the glowing horizon. The world had changed, sure. But moments like this reminded him just how much hadn't. From the moment he was a teenager, Malik had understood what it meant to be underestimated. Teachers had lowered their expectations. Bankers had raised their eyebrows. Venture capitalists had ignored his proposals until his company was already profitable. The only reason he was where he was now, CEO of an AI logistics empire valued at over $1 billion, was because he'd learned to play the game without waiting for fair treatment. But even with all that power, all that progress, it never stopped. The judgments, the assumptions, the dismissals. He heard hurried footsteps approaching from behind. The kind of footsteps that weren't just urgent. They were embarrassed. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, a voice called out. A man in a pale suit and an earpiece jogged up, slightly out of breath. Malik didn't need to look. He already knew who it was. Someone from the event staff who'd just been told they made a massive mistake. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize they'd turned you away. The man stammered, glancing back toward the yacht. Mr. Mitchell is on his way. He's furious. Malik finally turned to face him. That's so. Yes, sir. The moment he saw your name on the list, he dropped his wine glass. Said, Are you kidding me? Malik Carter's out there, and you told him to leave. The man wiped his brow. He's not taking this lightly. Malik didn't smile. He didn't need to. The man stood awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot, unsure whether to say more or step away. Malik spared him the decision. You're just the messenger, he said, voice even. But your hostess didn't just turn me away. She didn't even look at my invite. That's not a mistake. That's a mindset. The staffer opened his mouth, maybe to defend Madison, maybe to apologize again, but nothing came out. Malik turned back toward the water. A few moments later, the unmistakable sound of dress shoes pounding the dock broke the silence. Malik didn't have to turn around. Malik, a booming voice called out. Lance Mitchell, the event's organizer, and Malik's longtime business associate, stormed up, red-faced and wide-eyed. Man, I am so sorry, Lance said, coming to a stop beside him. I had no idea. None. I told Madison you were a top guest. Our biggest donor this year. I don't know what the hell she was thinking. She was thinking I didn't belong, Malik replied plainly. And no one corrected her. Lance winced. I'm going to handle it. Personally. She's gone after tonight. I swear to you. Malik raised an eyebrow. I don't need anyone fired. That's not what this is about. Lance looked confused. Then what do you want? I want you to ask yourself something, Malik said. If I had been a white guy in that same outfit, walking on with that same invite, do you think she would have stopped me? Lance didn't answer. That's the part you need to fix, Malik added. Not just Madison. The whole system that told her she was right to trust her gut over the guest list. Lance looked down at the dock, quiet for a long second. Then he looked up, meeting Malik's eyes. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right." Malik didn't nod or smile. He just stared at him for a long moment, then asked, "Am I still expected to speak tonight?" "Of course," Lance said. "Honestly, I think you should. They need to hear from you." Malik looked out at the yacht again, watching silhouettes move behind glowing glass. "Good," he said, "because I've got a lot to say." A beat passed between them. Lance started to speak, but Malik was already moving. Back down the dock. Back toward the boat that had pushed him out minutes earlier. This time, no one stopped him. No one dared. As Malik stepped back toward the yacht, the air felt different. He wasn't walking in as a man seeking entry anymore. He was walking in as the man whose presence they now feared they'd mishandled beyond repair. The guards who had previously followed Madison's orders without question now stood aside quickly, stiff and awkward, as if their uniforms were suddenly too tight. One of them gave Malik a slight nod of respect, the kind you give a man after realizing you might have just tried to escort a lion out of his own jungle. Malik didn't acknowledge them, not out of malice, but because he was done entertaining unnecessary apologies. What he needed now wasn't a performance. It was change, and that kind of change didn't come from red carpets or stammered regrets. It came from truth, and truth always walked in quietly before flipping the whole room on its head. As Malik ascended the steps onto the yacht once more, the conversations around him dimmed. Guests glanced up mid-laugh, mid-toast. The ones who had seen the earlier incident stiffened, eyes darting from him to Madison, who now stood frozen near the open bar, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. Her previously confident posture had dissolved into something fragile, cracked under the weight of realization. She now knew what everyone else was just beginning to understand. This man wasn't just another attendee. He was the event. Malik's steps were smooth, unhurried, his gaze steady but unreadable. People moved out of his way instinctively, like ripples making room for a stone. One man actually muttered, "That's him," to a nearby couple, who quickly turned their heads in stunned silence. Lance followed close behind, waving his hands slightly, mouthing apologies to the clusters of guests as if trying to preempt the inevitable fallout. He caught up to Malik at the entrance of the main deck, where servers in tuxedos were placing rows of flutes on his silver trays. "Listen," Lance whispered urgently. "I want to introduce you formally before the speeches. Set the record straight." Malik kept walking. "No need. Then at least let me say something before you speak. I don't want this night to turn into—" It already turned, Malik interrupted softly. "The only thing left is whether you stand in the truth or scramble for control." Lance had no response to that. They reached the center of the yacht's open-air deck, where a makeshift stage was set up beneath an elegant white canopy. The podium was still empty, the event's program just minutes away from beginning. But now, the crowd was paying attention not to the music or the hors d'oeuvres, but to Malik. Eyes followed him with growing confusion, recognition, and, for some, a quiet guilt. Madison stepped forward. Her face was pale, her voice low, barely audible over the breeze. "Mr. Carter, I'm truly sorry. I had no idea who you were. I made a terrible mistake." Malik turned to her, finally giving her his full attention. But it wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. It wasn't forgiveness or fury. It was clarity. "That's the point," he said. "You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. Because who I might be didn't fit your idea of who should be here." Madison blinked rapidly. "I wasn't trying to offend you." "But you did," Malik said flatly. "Not with your words. With your assumptions." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word struck like a bell, clean and unmistakable. A few guests nearby turned away, unable to pretend they weren't listening anymore. Malik continued, "You didn't just insult me. You insulted the very idea of inclusion this gala claims to stand for." Madison's lip trembled. She nodded, speechless. Malik turned and walked away, leaving her in stunned silence. He approached the podium without hesitation, surprising the small group of organizers still arranging name cards nearby. Lance stepped up behind him, trying to say something again, but Malik raised one hand, gently, and Lance understood. This was his moment. Malik looked out at the guests, now gathered in loose circles around the deck, a mix of curiosity and discomfort etched on their faces. He waited a beat, letting the weight of the silence settle. Then he spoke. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I came here to support a cause I believe in. Quietly, privately. I donated because I care, not because I needed applause." He looked around. No cue cards, no teleprompter, just truth. But before I could get on this yacht, before I could shake anyone's hand, I was stopped, judged, dismissed. He held their gaze. I was inside the yacht. Silence swallowed the usual rhythm of clinking glasses and casual laughter. Malik had just stepped away from the microphone, and for a few long seconds, no one moved. His words hung in the air like smoke, visible, thick, and impossible to ignore. People stood frozen, processing the weight of what they had just heard. Conversations halted. Waitstaff stopped mid-pour. Even the jazz band, sensing the shift in atmosphere, played softer until they gradually faded into silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just mark the end of a speech, it marks the beginning of discomfort and reflection. Lance Mitchell stood off to the side, face flushed. He had thrown dozens of these events before, some for causes he cared about, others for causes he didn't. But never had one of his high-profile galas unraveled so publicly and so righteously. He glanced at the VIP section, big donors, media personalities, and a few retired athletes, many of whom now stared down at their shoes or nervously sipped their drinks. Malik, meanwhile, didn't linger near the mic. He calmly stepped aside and picked up a glass of water from a nearby tray. His face betrayed no emotion. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry. He had simply spoken the truth, and now he waited to see what anyone would do with it. Then came the awkward ripple of movement. It started small. One guest clapped once, hesitantly, then another. Then a slow wave of applause rose up across the deck, awkward at first, but soon growing louder and more sincere. Not everyone joined in. Some clapped because they agreed. Some clapped because they were embarrassed not to. Others, the ones who still didn't fully understand why Malik's words stung so sharply, stayed quiet and watched. Lance finally made his way to the front, adjusting his blazer, trying to keep his composure. He took the mic, and for a brief second, looked at Malik standing just a few steps away. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he began, his voice steadier than he felt, "for your honesty, for your generosity, and for reminding all of us why we're really here." There was a beat of silence before he added, "Not just to donate, but to grow." A few heads nodded. A few others shifted awkwardly, unsure how far this growth thing would go. But not everyone was frozen. Back near the bar, Madison Wells, who had ordered Malik off the yacht just an hour ago, was unraveling. She had moved to the far end of the deck, away from the spotlight, and leaned against the railing. Her face, normally polished and camera-ready, was pale, lips tight, eyes wide. She clutched her wine glass like a lifeline, but hadn't sipped in minutes. The stem trembled in her hand. She was no longer just the hostess. She was the hostess, the one who had humiliated a major benefactor in front of Miami's most influential elite. She could feel the judgment now, the whispers, the stares. She had built her career on charm and connections, but tonight, her name was being spoken behind hands for all the wrong reasons. And she knew it. She watched as a group of guests, People who used to smile and compliment her dress suddenly avoided eye contact. The photographers who had once hovered nearby were now shooting candids of Malik instead. She had become invisible, and she knew why. Her boss, the director of the Horizon Bay Foundation, had already texted her. "We'll talk after the event." No emoji, no apology, just cold, corporate dread. Meanwhile, Malik stood near the back of the gathering, sipping his water and saying little. A few brave guests approached him, offering handshakes and quiet words of respect. One older gentleman, who had silently watched the entire situation unfold from the upper deck, finally made his way down. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "That was something we needed to hear." "Thank you." Malik nodded. "I appreciate that." The man lingered for a moment. "For what it's worth, I've been to 100 of these things, and I've never seen anyone say what you just said out loud." Malik gave a small smile. "Maybe it's about time someone did." And with that, more guests began to trickle over. Not in overwhelming droves, not trying to crowd him or flatter him, but just enough to show that they were listening, that they had heard him. A few offered apologies on behalf of the event. Others just wanted to introduce themselves. Malik accepted their words politely, never condescending, but always aware. Because this wasn't about ego. This was about opening eyes. And as more people made their way to him, some bashful, some bold, it became clear that this night was no longer about string quartets and auction paddles. It was about truth, and that truth had a name. Malik Carter, the man they had tried to remove from the yacht, had just become the most respected person on it. And no one, not even Madison Wells, could pretend other. Madison Wells tried to hold it together. The glass in her hand was nearly empty now. Whether from nerves or desperate sipping, she wasn't sure. She stood at the far edge of the deck, away from the guests, away from the laughter that now felt forced and hollow. She watched as Malik Carter became the quiet center of gravity, drawing people in without asking for attention. They came to him not with the usual fake flattery or business cards, but with sincerity. And worst of all, they ignored her. She had built a career out of control. Control over seating charts, RSVPs, VIP access, lighting, music, and moods. She knew how to read a crowd, how to steer conversations, how to get the right people talking to each other in the right corners of the right rooms. But nothing in her meticulously curated event playbook had prepared her for what had just happened. She had misjudged someone badly, and now she was standing in the wreckage of that judgment. Her heart pounded as she looked toward the bar, where Malik now stood speaking calmly with a city council member and a pair of well-known philanthropists. His presence wasn't loud, but it commanded attention, and she knew she had tried to erase that presence before it even had a chance to walk on board. She couldn't stand still any longer. With shaky breath, Madison set down her empty glass, adjusted the hem of her white blazer, and began to walk. The crowd seemed to part as she moved through it, not out of respect, but discomfort. People knew what she had done. Even those who hadn't seen the moment firsthand had heard whispers, pieced things together, and now regarded her with thin smiles and darting eyes. No one stopped her. No one joined her. When she finally reached Malik, he was mid-sentence. She waited quietly, not daring to interrupt. He finished his thought, nodded to the two men he was speaking with, then slowly turned to her. The silence between them was deafening. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. "Mr. Carter," she began, barely above a whisper. "Malik." He said nothing. He simply looked at her, expression calm but unreadable. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for how I treated you earlier, for what I assumed." Still, he said nothing. His silence wasn't cruel. It was powerful, the kind that demanded reflection rather than relief. Madison continued, her voice cracking. "You don't owe me your time or your forgiveness, but I want you to know I was wrong. I looked at you and didn't see what I should have. I didn't even try to see. And that's not just embarrassing, it's shameful." A few people nearby turned to listen. The clinking of glasses softened. The night had grown still again. I made a judgment, she admitted, eyes beginning to water. And it wasn't just about you. It was about every person I've dismissed in small ways without even thinking. You just happened to be the one strong enough and gracious enough to stand in it. Malik finally spoke, his voice low and measured. Do you know what would have happened if I wasn't who I am? He asked. If I didn't have wealth, status, or a name you could Google? Madison swallowed hard. I would have left. Quietly. Maybe hurt. Maybe humiliated. And no one here would have questioned it. No one would have even noticed. She lowered her gaze. You're right. Malik continued. I didn't come here to cause a scene. I came here to support something bigger than any one person. But when people like me are told we don't belong, when we're made to prove our worth in rooms where others are simply welcomed, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a sickness. Madison nodded slowly, tears brimming now. I know. No, he said. You're starting to understand. But knowing? That takes more time. More change. More humility than one apology at a gala. She wiped her eyes. Then I'll start now. There was a long pause. Finally, Malik nodded. You should apologize, he said. But not just to me. You should ask yourself how many others you've excluded without even realizing it. And then fix it. Not tonight, but going forward. Madison looked up, and for the first time that night, Malik saw something honest in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, but humility. I will, she said quietly. I have a lot to fix. He didn't offer a warm smile. He didn't pat her shoulder or tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. But he offered her something more important than comfort. He offered her accountability. And that was something most people in her position had never faced. She turned to leave, not in shame, but in deep thought, her heels clicking softly on the deck. Malik watched her go, then turned back to the crowd. The conversations had restarted, but they were different now. More hushed, more curious. A few eyes still lingered on him, not with doubt, but with quiet respect. Lance approached him again, holding 2 glasses of wine. Didn't know if you drank, he said, offering one with a nervous grin. Malik raised an eyebrow, took the glass, and said, Only when I know I've earned it. They clinked glasses. And just like that, the balance of power on that yacht shifted forever. The party continued, but the tone had changed. People who once floated through the gala with polished small talk now stood in clusters, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Malik Carter had not raised his voice, not once. Yet somehow, the most powerful message of the night came from him, precisely because he didn't have to shout. By the dessert hour, the usual peacocking had been replaced by contemplation. A handful of attendees who once brushed past Malik at the entrance were now seeking him out, not for photo ops, but for genuine conversation. One of them was Thomas Hale, CEO of a global shipping conglomerate, and, by all accounts, a man who rarely bothered with anyone he didn't already know. He found Malik near the starboard rail, gazing out at the glittering water. Carter, he said, his voice gruff but respectful. Mind if I join you? Malik didn't look over. He just nodded once. Go ahead. Thomas stood silently beside him for a moment. I owe you an apology, too. I was one of the people who saw you standing near the rope earlier and walked right by. Didn't ask your name. Didn't offer my hand. Didn't even give you the benefit of a second glance. I noticed, Malik said calmly. Thomas sighed. You handled all of that better than most men I know ever could. Malik turned to him now. That's because I've had practice. A lifetime of it. The words hit Thomas harder than he expected. You ever get tired of being the lesson? Thomas asked. Malik looked him dead in the eyes. Every single day. But if I walk away from these moments, who's left to teach it? Thomas went quiet. He didn't have an answer. Only admiration. A few feet away, Lance was watching the exchange with a quiet pride. He had known Malik for years, long before the fame, the Forbes list, the executive accolades. Back when Malik was a software engineer, grinding 80-hour weeks to keep his startup alive. Back when no one gave him a second look unless it was to doubt him. But what made Malik exceptional wasn't just his intellect. It was his endurance. His ability to stay calm in the face of ignorance. To meet disrespect not with revenge, but with revelation. Now, Lance found himself surrounded by the very people who used to look through them both. Except tonight, they weren't looking through Malik. They were looking at him. And for once, they were listening. As Thomas Hale wandered off, Malik leaned against the railing and sipped from his wine. That's when a younger guest approached. Aisha Williams, a rising star in sustainable architecture. She was one of the few black women at the gala and had stayed mostly to herself, unsure of where she truly belonged in the sea of tuxedos and old money. "I've been wanting to speak to you all night," she said, "but I didn't want to bother you." "You're not a bother," Malik said, his tone instantly softening. "I just wanted to say thank you for not walking away when you had every reason to. People like me, we notice when someone speaks up. We notice when someone stays." Malik offered a faint smile. "And people like you, what you build, what you represent, that's why I stay." They spoke for several minutes, not about wealth or networking, but about legacy, about doors and who gets to walk through them, about making sure those doors don't close behind you. Nearby, another guest, a popular talk show host, snapped a discreet photo of Malik and Aisha in conversation. Within minutes, it was posted online with the caption, "Real power doesn't need a spotlight." The photo went viral. Hashtags like hashtag Yacht Lesson, hashtag Malik Carter, and hashtag He Belongs Here began trending. But Malik had no idea. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was exactly where he needed to be, teaching through presence, not performance. As the yacht drifted further into the night, the glow of the harbor growing distant, Madison stood near the upper deck, watching it all unfold. She had made a colossal mistake, one that nearly ruined her reputation. But in a strange twist of fate, Malik's grace had not only saved her event, it had elevated it. People would remember this night, not for her decor or playlist, but for what they learned. And even more importantly, for who they learned it from. At the buffet table, two middle-aged investors who had once scoffed at the younger tech crowd were now discussing Malik's venture capital firm, curious about how he chose the startups he backed. One of them even admitted, "We've been fishing in the wrong pond. Guys like him, they're the future." Maybe they always were. By the time the final toast was called, Malik stood surrounded by a small but growing circle of people, entrepreneurs, leaders, even a senator, listening intently as he spoke not of profits, but of purpose. He didn't dominate the room. He elevated it. And for the first time in a long time, Malik Carter felt something he didn't often allow himself to feel in these kinds of spaces. He felt seen. As the final hour of the gala arrived, the energy aboard the yacht shifted once again, this time with intention. The clinking of champagne flutes, once used to toast shallow pleasantries, now carried weight. Conversations grew deeper. People spoke in lower tones, not out of secrecy, but reverence. Malik Carter, once pushed aside like some uninvited extra, was now the gravity center of the entire event. Not because he demanded attention, but because his silence, then his words, had reset the temperature of the entire room. Up on the observation deck, Malik leaned on the railing, half listening to the waves lap gently against the hull. He wasn't smiling, but he was calm. The kind of calm that only comes after you've decided not to prove your worth anymore. He didn't need to. Next to him, Lance handed over a tumbler of sparkling water and exhaled. "You realize you just gave these people a masterclass in humility, right?" Malik smirked faintly. They'll forget it by next weekend. Lance nodded. Some will, but not all. And the ones who remember, they'll start seeing people differently. Behind them, another cluster of guests was forming, not around the DJ, not around the dessert table, but around Malik. Executives, creatives, politicians, people from all rungs of the social ladder, now orbiting a man they once tried to ignore. But not everyone was clapping in private. One guest in particular, Douglas Langston, a smug hedge fund manager known for his arrogance, stood with arms crossed and a wine glass nearly empty. "This is all for show," he muttered to no one in particular. "All this sudden interest in him. A publicity stunt. I give it a week." He was overheard by Aisha, who stood nearby in a bold red dress that matched the steel in her spine. "No, Doug," she said calmly. "What you saw tonight wasn't a stunt. It was restraint. Dignity. Something you clearly haven't mastered." Doug scoffed but had no comeback. He retreated to the bar, and no one followed. Meanwhile, back on the deck, the hostess, Madison, was finally making her way toward Malik. Her makeup still flawless, but her confidence visibly cracked. This wasn't the version of herself she had planned to present tonight. "Malik," she began, gently placing her hand on the glass rail beside him, "I owe you an apology. A real one." He turned, his gaze steady but not unkind. "For what exactly? The way I was dismissed, or the way it made you look?" She flinched, ever so slightly. "I was trying to protect the exclusivity of the event," she offered. "It was never personal." "Everything's personal when it's selective," Malik said. "That's the problem. You think you're enforcing quality. What you're really enforcing is comfort, and that comfort always comes at the cost of someone else's dignity." There was a long pause. "I get it now," she said softly. "And I'm sorry I didn't get it sooner." "I'm not here for apologies," Malik replied. "I'm here to invest in better. That starts with awareness, followed by action." She nodded, her expression a blend of shame and awakening. "Thank you for not leaving. I don't walk away from opportunities to build," he said simply, "even when the foundation is cracked." As she stepped back into the crowd, shaken but enlightened, Malik turned his attention to an elderly man approaching slowly with a silver cane. Everyone recognized him. Jameson Rothschild, a legend in the banking world. He rarely spoke at events anymore, let alone approached guests uninvited. But tonight was different. "Mr. Carter," the old man said, his voice gravelly yet clear, "I've attended 1,000 galas. I've hosted half of them. But I've never seen someone command a room the way you did. Without shouting, without showmanship. Just presence." "I wasn't trying to command anything," Malik replied. "I was just trying to exist." "That," Rothschild said, tapping his cane once on the wooden deck, "is exactly what made it unforgettable." The exchange sent ripples through the nearby guests. Cameras stayed down. Phones were respectfully pocketed. This wasn't a viral moment. This was a real one, and everyone felt it. As the yacht began its return to the harbor, Malik took one last look at the skyline, bold, shimmering, and full of potential. He didn't need their validation. Never did. But tonight reminded him of something greater. Presence changes spaces. Not just by showing up, but by standing firm in your truth, no matter how many try to push you out of the frame. The men who dismissed him, they had to reevaluate what power really looked like. The women who watched in silence, they found inspiration in how he stood tall, not loud. And the young professionals tucked in corners, doubting if they belonged in such rooms. Tonight, they had their answer. They did, and always had. All it took was one man refusing to disappear. The yacht docked slowly under the glimmering city skyline, its lights reflecting off the water like stars scattered beneath the surface. but no one was in a rush to leave. Something unspoken hung in the air, like the guests knew they'd just witnessed something rare, something that would linger in conversations far longer than any DJ set or champagne toast. Malik remained near the upper deck, quietly gathering the blazer he had set aside earlier. He didn't need to say much anymore. The room had already adjusted to his presence, and now the atmosphere felt lighter, less pretentious, more aware. People began approaching him in pairs and small groups. First came an environmental entrepreneur who had previously avoided him during cocktail hour. Then a tech investor who offered a handshake with both hands, not out of obligation, but with respect. One guest, a young black woman named Renee, clearly new to these circles, mustered up the courage to step forward. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "for not leaving, for letting them see who you are. Because people like me, we notice, and we remember." Malik's expression softened. He saw something familiar in her eyes, something raw. He remembered being the youngest in the room, unsure whether his presence was welcome or tolerated. "You belong here," he told her. "Not because someone says so, because you already carry value. Don't ever let a cold welcome convince you otherwise." She nodded, eyes shining, and stepped back in a crowd, standing just a little taller now. In another corner, the yacht's event photographer, who had earlier skipped taking any portraits of Malik, now lingered nearby. He hesitated, camera in hand, clearly unsure if it was too late to document the man of the hour. Malik caught his glance and gave a small nod of permission. The photographer stepped forward, adjusted his lens, and snapped the shot. It wasn't posed. Malik simply stood there, hands in his pockets, skyline behind him, unbothered and unshaken. Click. That single image would later be shared across social media with a caption someone else wrote. Power doesn't always speak first, but when it does, it never has to shout. Down by the main cabin, Madison, the hostess, was talking to the yacht's event coordinator, trying to downplay what had happened earlier. "It was a misunderstanding," she whispered. "He wasn't on the original RSVP list. I was just trying to maintain protocol." The coordinator looked unconvinced. "He was on a master list sent by the foundation weeks ago. He RSVP'd himself." Madison's face flushed. "Still, I didn't recognize him. How could I have known?" "You didn't have to know him," the coordinator said. "You just had to treat him like a person." The words hit harder than Madison expected. There was no malice in the coordinator's tone, just disappointment. Madison looked around, noticing how many people now hovered near Malik, not her. Her curated event had been hijacked by decency, and yet, for once, she had nothing clever to say. Lance reappeared with 2 coats draped over his arm. "Car's waiting, boss," he said to Malik. "Want to head out?" "In a minute," Malik replied. His eyes were fixed on something, or someone, at the lower deck. It was an older gentleman, unfamiliar to most, walking slowly with a cane and a helper beside him. Malik motioned toward Lance. "See that man?" he asked. "That's Dr. Roland J. Thomas, first black board member at the city's transportation authority. Paved the way for people like me. You want to say hello?" "No," Malik said quietly. "I want to let him enjoy his evening. He's earned it." The humility in that moment struck Lance more than anything that had happened all night. Malik hadn't used his power to belittle anyone, not even the hostess who embarrassed him. He hadn't raised his voice, called anyone out online, or caused a scene. He simply existed with strength and let others choose what to do with their discomfort. That, Lance realized, was real power. As guests slowly made their way off the yacht, Malik was the last to step off. The dock was quieter now, the buzz of the party trailing off behind him. But before he reached the car, he noticed something near the dock entrance. A sign, freshly stenciled on a poster board for the charity event. It read, "Inclusive Innovation Gala, where every voice matters." He chuckled under his breath. The irony didn't even sting anymore. It just confirmed what he already knew. Slogans were easy. Change was harder. Still, he paused, pulled out a pen from his coat pocket, and scribbled one line beneath the slogan. Words matter. Actions echo louder. MC. He tucked the pen away and walked toward the waiting car. As the door closed behind him and the vehicle pulled away from the dock, Malik leaned back in his seat and looked out at the harbor. The city was awake, glowing, and full of stories. Tonight, one of those stories had been rewritten, not just for him, but for every person who ever stood at the edge of a room, wondering if they were enough, before realizing they always were. The car ride from the harbor was silent at first. Malik sat in the back seat, gazing out the tinted window as the bright lights of the city blurred into one continuous stream. Lance, seated in the front passenger seat, was quiet too, but his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror more than once. He knew his boss was thinking deeply. That wasn't unusual. But tonight, something about Malik's stillness felt different, heavier, but also more resolved. Do you want to stop anywhere on the way home? Lance finally asked. Malik didn't answer right away. Then he said, yeah, there's a diner on 12th and Ashwood. Still open. Lance checked quickly. Yep, 24 hours. Want me to call ahead? No need. We'll just drop in. 15 minutes later, they pulled up to a modest little place tucked between a laundromat and a tire shop. The neon sign buzzed faintly above the door. Mama C's Diner. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease and old coffee, and the laminated booths had seen better days. But Malik loved this place. It reminded him of when he was just getting started, before the IPOs, before the press, before the seat on national boards. Back when he came in with nothing but a borrowed laptop and big dreams. He and Lance slid into a corner booth. A server approached, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes but a warm smile. Hey baby, she said. What can I get y'all tonight? Usual, Malik said, smiling. And give Lance the blueberry pie this time. He's earned it. She laughed. You got it. As she walked off, Lance leaned in. You come here often? Every other Friday, Malik replied. Before I became everyone, sir. It keeps me grounded. Lance nodded. That crowd tonight. They didn't know who you were until you told them. But it's crazy how fast everything flipped. It's not crazy, Malik said. It's expected. That's how this world works. People only adjust their behavior when you prove you're worth something to them. But that's not the same as respect. He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Respect is when they treat you with dignity before they know your resume. Lance tapped the table softly. Still, you handled it like a masterclass. That speech, the way you didn't even raise your voice. People are going to be talking about that for a long time. Malik chuckled. Let them. But I wasn't performing. I just got tired of shrinking myself so others could feel taller. Their food arrived, a simple spread of pancakes, scrambled eggs, and 2 mugs of coffee. Comfort food. Real food. As they ate, a young busboy came by to clear a nearby table. He paused when he saw Malik, his face lighting up in recognition. Wait, are you Malik Harder? The boy asked. Malik looked up. I am. I read your story last year for my college essay. About building your company from your mom's garage. That speech you gave at the Entrepreneur Summit, that changed how I saw myself. Thank you. Malik smiled, genuinely touched. What's your name? Devin. You in school now? Community college. Studying business. Keep at it, Malik said. And when you hit your first wall, remember, it's not the wall that defines you. It's what you decide to do next. Devin nodded with wide eyes, then shuffled away, his posture noticeably straighter. Lance grinned. You're out here mentoring folks over eggs and syrup now. Always have, Malik said. The real change doesn't happen in conference rooms. It happens in places like this, where people don't wear masks to feel accepted. He glanced down at his phone. An unread message from the Events Foundation director had come in. Malik, just wanted to say thank you again. The board and donors were extremely moved. We'd love to invite you to be keynote speaker at next year's gala, and perhaps even serve as an executive advisor going forward. You changed more than the mood tonight. You reminded us what leadership looks like. Malik read it silently, then locked the phone without replying. He didn't need a title or a stage to prove anything. Across the diner, an older man dropped his cane while paying at the counter. Malik rose instinctively and walked over, picking it up and handing it to him with care. The man nodded, touched by the gesture. Thank you, young man. No problem, sir. Malik returned to his booth, sat down, and resumed sipping his coffee. Just another man helping another. No fanfare. No announcements. As the city pulsed outside, Malik's heart felt calm. He hadn't just reclaimed his dignity tonight. He had shown others how to hold on to theirs, even when others tried to strip it away. He didn't need headlines. He didn't need applause. He just needed to keep showing up and standing tall. Because sometimes that was enough to tilt the world a little more toward justice. The next morning, social media was ablaze. Clips from a yacht party had leaked, short, grainy videos captured on phones showing Malik Carter calmly addressing the crowd, his voice clear and composed, his words cutting through the air like a quiet storm. One clip in particular had gone viral. Malik standing beneath the chandelier, saying, "You didn't disrespect me because I'm nobody. You disrespected me because you assumed I was nobody." Within hours, hashtags like hashtag Malik Carter, hashtag Speak with Grace, and hashtag Yacht Lesson began trending across platforms. Influencers, activists, and business leaders reposted the video with reactions ranging from outrage at the hostess's behavior to admiration for Malik's restraint and power. Even major media outlets picked up the story. Talk shows dissected the incident. Business podcasts replayed the speech as a masterclass in executive leadership under pressure. Some commentators dubbed him the Quiet Storm CEO. But Malik wasn't watching any of it. He was walking through the doors of the Lakeside Foundation, not to attend another event, but to meet privately with the board. Inside the large glass panel conference room, the energy was tense. The chairwoman, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, stood as Malik entered. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I want to begin with a formal apology. What happened last night was inexcusable." Malik didn't flinch. "Your apology is noted, but I'm not here for that." The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Malik pulled out a slim binder from his bag and placed it on the table. "I'm here to propose a partnership, not just with me, but with the youth programs in Southeast City. For years, they've been underfunded while foundations like yours throw parties for the elite. That ends today, if you mean what you say about community impact." The room fell silent. "You want me involved? Then it won't be about ribbon cuttings and galas. It'll be about rolling up sleeves, creating mentorship pipelines, funding real access to opportunity. Not just scholarships, but infrastructure, tech labs, internships, startup seed grants." One of the younger board members leaned forward, clearly impressed. "And what do you want in return?" Malik looked him in the eye. Respect. For the people who look like me. For the communities I come from. I want to stop being the exception and start building a system where more of us get seen before we have to shout. There was a long pause. Then the chairwoman nodded. You'll have our full cooperation. Malik stood. Then we'll begin Monday. As he left the room, Lance was waiting outside. You good? Better than good, Malik said. For once, the room changed because I was in it, not after they found out who I was. Later that week, the yacht's hostess, Clarissa Monroe, released a public statement. She apologized for her unconscious bias and acknowledged that her behavior reflected a larger problem with how we judge others based on appearances. But few were impressed. Some accepted her apology. Others saw it as PR damage control. But Malik, he didn't respond at all. He didn't need to. He wasn't interested in apologies born from exposure. He cared about change born from reflection. The following weekend, Malik was back in the community center where he'd first taught coding workshops to teens. The room buzzed with excitement as he stepped to the front, wearing jeans and a hoodie, not a tailored suit. A teenager raised his hand. Mr. Carter, were you mad when they kicked you off the yacht? Malik smiled. I was disappointed, but I wasn't mad, because that moment showed me exactly what still needs to change. And it reminded me why I do what I do. The kid nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson behind the words. You know, Malik continued, life's going to give you two choices when someone underestimates you. You can get angry and fight them, or you can rise above and show them. But the key is, don't just show them. Show the world. The room erupted in applause. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long orange streaks over the city skyline. Malik stood at the door, watching the teens pour out, laughing and chatting, full of energy and dreams. He knew he couldn't fix every injustice. He couldn't undo every assumption, every slight, every time someone looked at him and saw only their bias. But he could keep showing up, and every time he did, he carved out a little more space for those who came after him to stand tall without needing to explain why they belonged. Because Malik Carter didn't need a yacht party to prove his worth. He was the table, and now he was making room for everyone who never got an invitation.